Well, here we are. It's been 9 months, the middle of January, when we taped number 13. Now here we are on number 14. 9 months spread. How come? Well, I don't want to go into all the details, but I'll just mention two things. A little cancer, a little surgery, and a few more dangling participles, along with had 4 teeth jerked out, had titanium screws put in, 4 of them, which would take 4 months to wait, so that the titanium screw or implant can be accepted by the bone structure. It was accepted on 3, but the 4th one rejected by the bones. I got infection. It spread to the next door neighbor tooth. Result was, I'd go in, yank out the titanium screw, and it's still out. So I'll probably get 3 sometime around Thanksgiving. And they got to, by that time, put the screw back in on the one that they had to take out. This goes on and on and on. In the meantime, I had a sore mouth trying to eat. On this side was tough, and that side was tough, and straightforward was tough. So here we are. Well, I'm alive, and we made it, and there's a few other things along the way, but we're going to go for it. And when 13 ended, I'd left Washington, D.C. I'm thinking of the lines, so it's home again, home again, home again for me. My heart is turning home again, and there I long to be, in the blessed land of room enough, beyond the ocean bars, where the air is full of sunshine, and the flag is full of stars. So, here we are. Now I have summarized what I want to say today in 4 lines. One, of course, is home again. We'll talk about that. And on the next one, in a way, is where the real war begins. And the third one is why the war is because I'm going to try and collect what I deserve to be paid for the billboards that are going to be coming down. So it's collecting just compensation according to the Constitution. And the final one is 13 states. So I'm spread thick and wild apart, and we're located from Canada to Mexico and from the Pacific to the Mississippi. That's the spread. That's big. Takes a lot of money just to control that. Well, it really is hard to believe. And I'm so grateful that I was successful enough in Washington, D.C. to be able to come home. Now, I'm a little bit debating whether was it 6 months or was it 7 months. I know the totality was 10 months, so somewhere between 6 and 7 months. I think the last CD says it's 6 months. I've looked at that. Maybe it might be a little closer to 7 months, but it doesn't make much difference. In thinking about this and what I experienced, that didn't mean that Washington, D.C. ceased. I kept my apartment. I kept my apartment for about 4 years because I'd be going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Because if you leave it to those guys, you're going to lose because they'll just change and shift, and that's the way it is. I really felt, in a way, sorry for John A. Volpe, the secretary. My last conversation with him in Washington, D.C., I went to him and I said, we've got this passed. There's going to be an implementation of the Highway Beautification Act. It'll be just in its incipient state, a small investment by the Congress. That's all you need. Because once you get it rolling, it can keep going. But it will never get rolling if you allow this to slip down into the Bureau of Public Roads, the monstrosity of bureaucracy. It will never happen. Nothing worse than bureaucracy. In that context, there's about 3 levels of bureaucracy, from my experience. One, which is the least offensive, is found in business, found in big companies, corporations, however you want to call it. They have their bureaucracy. And that bureaucracy can be very, very difficult. I believe it's one of the reasons why I was determined never to work for another company or a big company or any company. They'd fire me in a week because I've got ideas of my own. I already know that going in. I've always said that about myself. I'd be fired that quick because I wouldn't blend. I just can't blend. I'm just one of those things. I don't blend. I've got thinking and ideas of my own. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But at least I don't run around being frustrated. And if they don't work, I've got only myself to blame, no one else. Now, so you got the bureaucracy of government. Of business. The next, which is worse, is the bureaucracy of government. And that is really can be vicious and very, very costly, and is costly. Then, which I've had experience with that. I mean, real experience, more than about anybody I know. And then the final level, and the worst of all, is universities. It's horrible. They are so jealous of each other. I'm thinking about being home again and how wonderful it was to come here and know that I won't have to go back. But like I said, I kept the apartment for about 3 to 4 more years, and I had to keep going back. And I admit I enjoyed going back, as long as it wasn't too long. And I had my cereals all lined up with milk in the fridge. So all I had to do was buy some fresh milk, and I could live off of the cereals, take turns, the different ones. And it was interesting which one's the best, which one isn't, and blah, blah, blah. Talking last night to Jack Francis. He's same age as I am. And the conversation went for over 3 hours on the phone. And I called him. So it was on my dime. It made me think that after all these years, and I was in my 20s, late 20s, when he walked into my office representing the state of Utah to appraise the signs that I had up Party's Canyon, and because the state had to pay for them in order to take them down, and they had promised the contractors that were widening the highway that everything was clear, no problem, but my signs were there, and I would not move them. And the Attorney General ruled in my favor that Snarr can leave those signs there. You better pay him for his billboards. And so Jack was an appraiser for the highway department, he came into my office. As I told him last night, when you walked in, Jack, I did not have an ounce of faith in you. I knew that you were going to try and take advantage of this situation. I didn't have any faith. But after about the third time, fourth time, this grand person, I could tell, was honest. He wanted a win-win. He understood that I should be paid fairly, and he was not afraid to determine what that would be. And because of that meeting with me, he ends up in Washington, D.C., reporting directly to John A. Volpe, the Secretary of Transportation. I got him the job. And I remember telling Volpe, and when I mentioned to him, Jack Francis from Utah, is he a Mormon, Doug? Yes. Doug, they're starting to call me a Mormon around here because of my association with you. And Volpe, who was born in Italy and arrived in the United States at age 9, of course, was a deep-seated Catholic. And he went to Mass every morning before going to the office. That was just the way he was, a devout man. So I'm having this conversation, my last one, with Volpe in his office. Mr. Secretary, the bill has passed sufficiently to start implementing this program. And you know, if you give it to the Public Works Committee, they'll destroy it. So out of that, we get Jack Francis involved in the matrix of how to do it, who reports directly to Volpe, and he becomes, in effect, a czar over the highway beautification program. So I took comfort the fact that he was there. And I told Volpe about him. I says, he is incorruptible. You cannot corrupt him. Nobody can corrupt Jack Francis. It's impossible. He's that honorable a man. His parents are that way. He's raised that way. He's just sound and solid. So you could trust him with your life. And I can guarantee you, so could I. But I said to Volpe, Mr. Secretary, you're going to have to launch the program now. You cannot wait. It's like now. And what I mean by now, within about 100 days. And that means you got to take down signs. Now, you might not want to start in Utah because of the criticism from some of the congressmen and others. You might not want to do that. But I recommend you start now. And what I mean by that is you personally take the chainsaw and you saw them down. Nobody else. You do it. You get the press there, photograph you, and therefore you're committed, they're committed, everybody's committed. They're involved in this. The White House knows what's happening. All the Congress knows what's happening. Everybody knows what's happening. You're moving ahead. So what he did was he put Jack Francis in charge of determining where they're to go. Now, the first sign was Freeport, Maine, of all places. Maine, oh, brother, out there in the outer 40, if there ever was an outer 40. One sign, bang, went down. It was just kind of an incident. Pictures were taken, no big deal. The second one was Denver, Colorado. That was a good one. Now, I like the idea of it being in Denver because the help that I've received from other sign companies, 2 of the owners of signs were from Denver. Those 2 owners, Grant Wilkins and Lou Gregg, had a number of signs in quite a few states, and they're very good at representing the sign industry and what was happening, and verifying everything I'd been telling Volpe that it indeed was the truth. Greg died about 10 years ago, and Grant Wilkins is alive today. He's 90 years of age. He's a good guy, really good guy. The third one was Salt Lake City. Now, I maintain that what we had to have here in Salt Lake was kind of a, let's call it an outside or outdoors noteworthy event, for the want of a better slogan. Outdoors noteworthy event. And so it became that. And in that meeting, they had built the state had built they had planks to sit on, everything. People were invited all over, and one of the church was represented by Boyd K. Packer. Now, what brought Boyd K. Packer into the matrix of that event was when he was a mission president, he arranged to take a copy of the Book of Mormon to the governor of Massachusetts, which happened to be John A. Volpe. So he was there. And they were able to say, and meet each other, and all good things happened by having him there. That was great. Now, when it came to the governors, a little background there. Volpe had decided with Jack Francis to do it in a certain week. They found out that week there was a national governors conference, so there wouldn't be any governors involved. So Jack recommended maybe we'll take, and maybe we should postpone it another week. Volpe says, no, we're going to do it the week that you originally chose, right during that governor's conference. So what we'll do, we'll fly an airplane, pick up the governor of Maine, fly him up there while I take the sign down, and we'll fly him back. We'll take that jet, fly him, pick up the governor of Colorado, bango, fly him back. We'll go get the governor of Utah, same thing. We're going to do it in basically 1 day and a half. That's what we're going to do it in. So that's what happened. So the governors were all there. I like Volpe. That man has got guts. He's willing to shift gears, but he's not going to postpone anything. He wanted them all to know how important it was. If you pick up a governor in a private jet, or I should say a government jet, then fly it back and forth, this is a pretty important program. Who else is going to do that? When will that ever happen again in a governmental process? Well, so we're now in Salt Lake City. And there is Brother Boyd K. Packer. There is the governor. And there is also there the Highway Commission, the head of the Highway Department, Henry Helland, who I can't say enough good about. There is Ernest L. Wilkinson, BYU, was there at that event. And I was really, really honored to think he would come. But he was invited. And the invitation came to him from actually the office of the Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C. Jack Francis. He was in charge. He graduated from BYU, by the way. Now, another thing, too, Bronco Mendenhall, the former football coach, Jack Francis is the uncle to Bronco Mendenhall. That is, Bronco Mendenhall's wife and Jack Francis's wife are both daughters from the presiding bishop of the church, Vandenberg. And so that's what brought those two families together. There were 7 people in the airplane that Volpe used, which included Jack Francis, of course, Joe Bosco, who was the consigliere to Volpe. If you've ever read some of the books on Italian underworld play, you'll run across the consigliere. But Joe Bosco was a wonderful, smart man. He was in the middle of everything. And I'll never forget, Jack told me last night that when he first met Volpe, he met Bosco first. Then Bosco took Jack up and made the introduction to Volpe. And Jack's just right fresh from Utah. And then he said, and Jack says, I turned around and Bosco was gone. And I turned around back and he's clear on the back of the room. We're talking about a huge room. Huge room. And having been in that room twice. Huge room. And there he was taking notes. He's not in the middle of things, but yet he is. He knows everything that's going on. And Bosco was Italian also. So they got along good, trusted each other, Bosco and Volpe. And Jack grew to love both of them immensely. There were 3 speakers. There was the head of the Highway Department, Henry Helen, which was most appropriate. The governor said, no, let's let the Highway Department be in the middle of this. They've done all the work, not me. I was quite impressed by that. Then there was Johnny Volpe spoke next, and then I spoke last. And that was the program. And then I had a big crane, which I've owned for many, many years up to that time to help build tall billboards. And we took and studied the sign. The sign was a vertical sign, free form. I've already explained before how I did my signs. And whacked that down, went through, cut it off. The crane was holding it so it wouldn't fall, hurt anybody, and then it just laid the sign down. And the program was over. Then the last one was Boise, Idaho. Now up there, the Highway Department had taken and already pre-cut the sign down. Brother, talk about foolishness. And here he's going up there. So Volpe said, well, then you rebuild the sign so I can cut it down. Well, they had to wait an hour and a half while the Highway Department scurried around up there, got that sign stuck back up, and then he cut it down. All for press, all the way it is. I thought that's kind of an interesting little tidbit. They decided to stay at Little America in Cheyenne. And Jack was responsible to get the rooms for 7 people. Volpe, of course, would take the presidential suite. And that's quite a place, that Little America in Cheyenne. It's an amazing place, actually. Great food, great everything. So he calls in to get the rooms. Well, Mr. Francis, every room is gone. He said, no, I have got to have rooms for 7 people, including the Secretary of Transportation. How many times have you had a secretary from the President's cabinet going to stay in your hotel? How many times? He said, well, so far none, until now. But we have already rented every room out. And Jack said, well, I'm going to call Earl Holding myself. And she said, please don't. we'll take care of you, brother. So it was done. When Jack was hired, Volpe told him, Jack, you're a member of the family. Don't be afraid to throw your power around. Get things done. Don't be afraid to throw your power around. You're part of my family. I thought that was wonderful. Now, Jack was there 12 years. 4 years while the secretary was there, which were 4 of some of the best years you could ever imagine for a governmental employee. But when Volpe left at the end of his term, and then the ball game changed. Stayed on for 8 more years. But it was not easy, nor was it fun. It was hard. Because there are those, again, I'm talking about bureaucracy, the jealousy between people. There are those that said, well, he's had all this power, and he threw it around. He got things done, the program's launched, and now we're going to take it out on him. And so as he explained to me, maybe you should have quit. And I says, no, I'm glad you stayed. Because you honored the Secretary of Transportation, John A. Volpe, in the first place, who hired you to do one thing, and that is the implementation of the Highway Beautification Act. And you stuck. You stayed. You were a good person, Jack. You were a man of integrity, immense integrity. I just can't help but think of the words of Samuel Johnson, and I've quoted them before. There is no friendship without confidence, and there is no confidence without integrity. I think that's the basis of marriage, everything, right there. I'm now having to go forth and work with 13 states. That was an education. That took basically about 4 years to collect the money. And some of the states were fantastic, and others not quite so easy and not quite so pleasant. But my favorite one to work with was Utah. They made it possible in the first place that there was an implementation of the Highway Beautification Act. No other state put forth more effort. Henry Helland was in Washington, D.C. 3 times testifying and for the implementation of the act. The state had entered into a contract with me, what they'd pay for each individual sign. And Jack Francis was the one who appraised each one of these signs. So when they go to deal with me, they deal with me as a sign company and not sign by sign. A sign company. They get, here's what it costs us. They add it up at all, and one check and one deal. We take the signs down. They pay me when I get the signs down. Bango. Just like that. Wonderful. Sign by sign, I could stretch that thing out for years. I just really feel how blessed I was to have been here in Utah, where there was just kind of a higher degree of integrity with the people I worked with all the way through. Governor Rampton was fantastic. Vern Romney, the Attorney General, couldn't ask for anyone more sound and solid and smart as he was for the implementation of the law. He was just terrific. And so all these events that took place, it's like miracles, just little miracles, one after another. And it was just, the whole thing was just thrilling. Now, as I started to move into other states, some were very, very good. Very, very good also. One state that I had a lot of signs in was Nevada. And Nevada was a very important state. And extremely. Highway 80 going across the top of Nevada on its way to San Francisco. Tremendous. A lot of signs. They took the attitude that we can't believe how you did this. How did you ever get this bill through Congress and get it funded and get it implemented? How were you able to do that? We never seen anything like it. They didn't complain that they had to take the signs down, that they had to pay basically 90% of the cost, and the government would then pay. No, I got that wrong. They had to pay 10%, and the federal government pays 90%. Excuse me. And they didn't complain about any of that. It was just pleasant. I remember being in Carson City and sitting there, not knowing what to expect. They walked out. They said, "Mr. Snarr, here are the signs that we have for you in this state." And they had a picture of every one of those signs. Now, what I had done, I had a guy work for me named Harvey Lloyd. Harvey Lloyd was as wonderful as they come. He was born in Idaho, just out of Soda Springs. Eventually moved to Logan. And then I hired him. Harvey was an old shoe who was as smart as they come. But he came across as just being just kind of maybe not quite as swift as you might think. But he was swifter than anybody. So he was the one, and I said, "Now, Harvey, what you do, you got to go and travel these 13 states. You photograph each sign." So I get a photograph now. I do have photographs when they were first built. I want a photograph now. I want you to write down exactly the condition of that sign. I want the exact size to make sure it correlates with what we've got. I want you to figure all that out, Harvey. I want you to deal with the landowner, let them know there's a possibility, and it looks like it's going to come, but you don't know when, that the sign will be removed. And that we will then come in and take the sign down. Snarr Advertising will, and we will no longer pay any ground rent after that's done. Okay, you do that, Harvey. And I want two pictures. So we got one, and that we can lay down one to the state, and they can have ours. Well, the state of Nevada, they'd already beat us to the punch. And they had everything. But we had everything. And they knew that we had everything, because I pulled out all of my signs, pictures too. And so they had their part of the table, and I had my part of the table. And then they just added it all up. This sign's this. Now, the formula that they used to determine value was determined by Jack Francis. He had gone through all my books over and over again, and he knew where he stood and the technique that he used to determine the value of the sign. And then there's three basic ways. I won't get into that now. I've done that before, earlier in discussing the sign program when it first got initiated. It was a wonderful thing to know that they knew, that Volpe knew, because of Jack Francis. And it wasn't a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense. Things could happen fast, and decisions could be made timely, and just the way they should be done with government. Well, they gave me a check, and I accepted it. Just like that on the spot, Nevada. There's a little town, Virginia City. Kind of has a nice, famous ring to it. It's an old-time town. And afterwards, I went from Carson City to over to Virginia City, not too far away. Carson City is the capital. They had a clock. That clock is right over there. It's a grandfather clock. I bought that clock in an antique store. They gave me a pretty good deal on it. I felt good. It wasn't all that expensive, but it was more than I would normally pay. But I decided to buy that clock, kind of to celebrate the situation. Well, California was a very interesting state. They said, we pay more money in this state to the program, the highway program, than any other state in the Union. We pay more than what we get back. So if it's 90% of this they're going to pay for, it doesn't mean anything to us. Because what we pay is more than we get back from the federal government to build roads, build bridges, and everything else. We pay the most. So they take what we pay and help to finance certain states that pay less than it takes to build the roads and the bridges and so on in their states. Well, Mr. Snarr, we're happy to pay you for your signs. You don't have a lot, but you've done quite a job. And they also were very congratulatory. But you let me know in pretty strong language, we pay more than we get back from the federal government. And we're financing a lot of other states with their highway programs that they get from the federal government. Part of that is our money. Well, I got through California. Now, Wyoming was a very unique state. Little America has been there for ages in Wyoming. So Earl Holding came to me and said, we want to buy your signs. I said, well, if I sell them to you, then the government's not going to touch those signs. I can take care of that. And so he said, how much? So I figured it out, basically, what it would normally be. I already knew that. And I made sure that I was going to get paid right. But then I threw in a caveat. I said, in addition to you buying my signs, and you give me money for it, here's a contract I want you to sign. My wife and I can stay in any hotel, motel, or any property that you own as long as we want to, free, the rest of our lives. In other words, Mr. Holding, if I wanted to, I could move in to your Little America, for example, in Salt Lake City. I could live there. He agreed to that. However, I got to buy the food and pay for the phone bills. So I've several times, Carol and I have gone down and spent a month in San Diego. He's got the nicest hotel in all of San Diego. And they treat me like $1 million. I'll never forget when I laid this contract down, went to that hotel in San Diego and laid that thing down, and they ran this piece of paper over to the manager. Show it to him, picks the phone up, phones Salt Lake, and gets Earl Holdings' son, Steve, on the phone. Steve says, give him anything he wants. So he put Carol and I in the bridal suite, the $1,000 a night. It was fantastic. Absolutely gorgeous room. Well, it was more than one room, actually. Well, years later, I was on the board of directors of the Holiday Bank and Trust, a small community bank here in Salt Lake City. And they wanted, let's go someplace where we can kind of have a, the key executives and members of the board can go and we can discuss how we can improve the bank and increase profits and so on. Where should we go? Well, someone suggested Hawaii. I said, why don't you go down to San Diego? You're not going to spend your time just in an airplane all the way clear over there and then all the way back. We get to business quicker. Well, I prevailed. So I called them and told them we're coming down. When I got there, they gave me the presidential suite. That was $2,700 a day at that time. And this thing was really something. 2 bedrooms and a beautiful room in between, a beautiful room. They had everything in that presidential suite. Complete kitchen with everything. A washer, dryer, they had everything. It was amazing. And it took up 1/2 of the entire floor, the presidential suite. The top one. Now, on the other half is for Earl and his wife, Carol. They had that room. So there are 2 rooms on top of the hotel. Presidential suite and then the holding suite. Gosh, I was there for a week. It really impressed the others on the board, I can tell you that right now. Well, we get down to Montana. We just had a few signs there. The capital's Helena. Years and years ago, when I was still living in Idaho Falls, before I moved to Salt Lake, I bought a company, a small sign company, headquartered in Helena. Well, it proved to be a headache. It was a mistake. I think I might have told this story before. I don't know for sure. I decided that what I'd like to do is to make it profitable for one of my friends. While living in Idaho Falls, there was a man named John G. Macbeth. And John G. Macbeth was an insurance salesman for Beneficial Life. And I bought an insurance policy from him, a small one, but big for me in those days. And he then said to me, how well do you know accounting? I said, I've never had an accounting class in my life. I'm an artist. I can sell. I can paint. And I'm doing my best on the accounting side. He said, I'd like to teach you accounting. So I said, well, I'd like to learn from you. So he came to, and this is before I owned my first home. I just got married, actually. And so he'd come at 5 o'clock, and he would leave at 8 o'clock. And we did that 3 days a week. And he explained to me what an asset was. And he explained to me what a liability was, and how you put together a balance sheet, and a profit loss statement. Explained it all. And he really was a blessing to me. I said, now I got to pay you. He said, no, I won't take any money. I want to do this for you. I like you, Doug Snarr. I think you've got a long ways to go in this life. And I'd just like to be part of your life. I want to do this for you. So I got a hold of him and I said, John G., how would you like to own a little tiny sign company up in Helena, Montana? He said, I'd love that. I said, well, now there's not much there, really. They don't have a lot going for it. But he and his wife and family went up. I gave it to him. And it didn't cost him a penny. And he stayed there the rest of his life. Got very involved in the church up there. He's able to send his kids to college. He lived a good life. He and his wife are both deceased now. You know, I felt good about that. I made a mistake in buying in the first place into an asset for John G. Macbeth in gratitude for what he had done for me. I didn't ask him to teach me accounting. He volunteered that, knowing full well, I think by instinct, maybe the Spirit told him, I don't know for sure, but I needed that help. Well, that was an easy state to solve. And that worked out well. And John G., by the way, was up there and could drop over to the Capitol where the highway department was, blah, blah, blah. And so that one was good. Now, Colorado, that went just like that. I had these two sign company owners over there. I just sailed right through. Now, Idaho was different. Idaho was a pain in the neck. And I believe they wanted to prove that Utah was not as smart as they thought they were. And that Jack Francis is not as smart as he thinks he is. And Doug Snarr needs to be taken care of and cut down the size. So that stretched out for over 3 years with Idaho. Actually a pain in the neck for me. I don't want to go into details, except the council they had was really bad. His name was Tway, from Idaho Falls. Now, I heard by the grapevine, my dad used to say, that Tway, he's jealous of everybody. But he was a very bright attorney, but not honest. And not at all honest. He reminded me of, he should be in Washington, D.C., where he'd fit like a glove. Now, I was able to get a hold of the governor, Cecil Andrus. He liked me. He kept putting pressure on him, but he had to be careful. He was all for the environment. He gave a speech in Los Angeles, and he called me once, and he says, Doug Snarr, would you write my speech for me? I'd like to give it on the highway beautification. You've forgotten more than anybody else the country knows. Would you write it for me? I said, I'll write it for you. And I did. He told me I never changed one word he said. I read it once, and I knew you were spot on all the way through. And it made me feel good. Be able to stand up there and give a talk that makes sense, where it's a win-win, and not just one-sided for the environment only. It's a win-win. Good. I like that. So he and I became friends, and he's also deceased. It's amazing how many people that I know and that have helped me, they're all deceased practically. But Jack Francis is still alive. Thank heavens he is. I had one of the best conversations of my life with him last night. Finished at 1:30 in the morning. But, you know, they're 4 hours behind us, so it wasn't 1:30 for him, not by any means. I see it was, that make it what? 9:30, isn't it? 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, 1:30. Yeah, 9:30. When he wound up, it was 1:30 for me. Well, we came down to there are a total of 13 states. And I think the rest of the states, like Washington, Oregon, Arizona, New Mexico, and then there was Iowa and Nebraska, I believe that they all fell in place. I didn't have any trouble, but Idaho drove me nuts. And that stumbling block was that attorney, Tway. And he would figure out this and this and this, by the law, this and this. Now, what helped me a lot was a guy named Terry Crapo. Terry Crapo graduated from high school his junior year, went to from Idaho Falls, went to BYU. He graduated in 2 years. Then he went on to Harvard and graduated #1 in his class in law. But he married an Idaho Falls girl. He became a stake president. He was just as bright, young attorney as there was, and he became the Speaker of the House while he was still in his 20s in the Idaho legislature. And he helped me. Now, he worked for my uncle, William S. Holden, who I've been told by many is the most brilliant attorney in Idaho's history. And I can't judge that. All I know is that he's just the most amazing uncle I had, and my favorite uncle. He was not LDS, by the way. He married my mother's oldest sister. But he was good. And I think that since he was born in Missouri, that might have some bearing on it. But I gave him a real working over a number of times. But as he was dying, he told me, and he'd been all over, that you are the most remarkable entrepreneur that I've ever met. Really humbled me to the earth to hear him say that. I give you an idea of his stature. When Henry Ford II divorced his wife, we're talking a lot of money now. He came to Idaho Falls, hired Bill Holden to represent him because he was a consummate negotiator. He believed talk, 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 till you finally get your way, but don't break your pick in the process. I'll never forget that. Don't break your pick in the process. And then work it and just let it work out. And always keep it on a very friendly basis. But don't break your pick. I have a picture of him downstairs on the door that goes into my den. It's as wide as the door, blown up. And I just think he was a very, very handsome man, by the way. But don't break your pick, Doug. I have the tendency to break my pick because I get all upset, and because I'm high-strung. And he's smooth. He's just so smooth and so pleasant. I once said I'd like to take it to England, to my home Bill. He never had time. But his wife, Ida, went with me, took her over. And I loved Ida. And for her to be in a home that was built 72 years before Columbus discovered America was quite an experience for her on 3 levels. Took the train, went on into London, took her to a couple plays. I mean, she just loved it. Never been to Europe before. He never had time to go. But it was good. That's quite something, though, to have Henry Ford II come to you from Idaho Falls. But that's how of a consummate of a man he was. I'm thinking of a little poem that I've quoted to myself over and over and over again in all the years that I was negotiating with the government. Basically, all I did was negotiate. When I analyzed, well, what did you actually do, Doug? If you could just use one word, all these years working with state governments, the federal government, and various agencies. Now, I have a book right there of David Kennedy. David Kennedy was a banker. He was the president of Continental Bank in Chicago. He's LDS. And he was chosen by Nixon to be his secretary of the Treasury. And I'll never forget that in order to get the bill through that I wanted to get through, we had to have the Treasury Department to look at it. The reason is because the idea was to take money out of the Highway Trust Fund. And therefore, they'd have to sign off on that. So I go over there, knock on the door. It wasn't quite that simple by any means. I had to get that appointment. That was not all that easy. But I got the appointment. And I remember him sitting there. And I'll never forget this, just like it was yesterday. And he's sitting in his chair, and he had his lower button on his white shirt was unbuttoned, and the one above it, those two buttons. And the tie was off to the side. And he sat there and he said, I never dreamed that this job would be so exhausting and so hard for me to do. And it just, for some reason, just hit me. It is hard. And it does take a lot of work. A lot of work. Well, when that ended, he moved to Salt Lake City and did a lot of work as an ambassador for the church to go certain places, meet certain people, all kinds of things like that, because he had the reputation, particularly having served as the Secretary of Treasury in the United States government. And I just mentioned that little story to you as just to let you know how difficult it was. But one thing that I've always quoted over and over again, it's very, very simple. If you knew me and I knew you, and both of us could clearly see with an inner sight divine the meaning of your heart and mine, I'm sure that we would differ less and clasp our hands in friendliness. Our thoughts would pleasantly agree if I knew you and you knew me. And as I look back, I think that the key attitude on my part, and it had to be developed, had to be that I've got to get to know them first. So it never hurts yourself to ask one basic question. And that question was this: what would you do if you were me? I think I've asked that question in my adult life as a businessman in many different contexts more than any other single question. What would you do if you were me? And I've observed that in most people, a change took place. Some much more so than others. But you could see the attitudinal change in their face and in their eyes. And sometimes it was just instant. Because it let them know that I was a human being. It let them know that I trusted them enough to ask the question. And I was waiting an answer from them. And so I think in many cases, if not most, it brought out the best in them in the context of that conversation. And generally, in my case, I needed them. They didn't need me. I needed them. And therefore, I was putting myself in a position that was inferior to their position. Or hence I would never have asked the question. You know, I've been asked many times, well, gosh, there's still billboards standing. Let me just say this. There have been approximately 900,000 billboards removed, and there would not have been one. At least there would not have been one paid for if it wasn't for me. And I know that's true. I've been told that's true by key people in the press who are involved with what was happening. I've been told that's true within the Department of Transportation. I've been told that was true by John A. Volpe, Joe Bosco, and others involved in this. I was told that was true by the House of Representatives, the Subcommittee on Roads, and and in the Senate. So I know I'm not exaggerating, including Senator Moss told me that was true. Now, the question again is, well, gosh, how come there's still billboards standing? Well, that again is a decision that I made and that I impressed upon Secretary Volpe and the staff, and to work with the House committee on a subcommittee on roads. And here's the situation. I maintain this, that the highway beautification program was to beautify highways. Within the city limits, they have the right to zone. If you can zone a place for a hot dog stand, and you permit a hot dog stand or a hamburger place or whatever it might be, an antique shop, name it, to be there, and say, but you can't have a billboard there? That decision is up to the city fathers within their rights when that's what is zoned, and that constitutes the city limits. What constitutes the city? Where is the geography? Where is the pale or boundary of that city? Within that, they can make the zoning, and they have to answer to the public population. If the public wants them out of there, and it's quite obvious, they'll do it. But it's been my experience, what they do is limit. In most cases, they limit where billboards are permitted within the city. Now, Utah, it's a little bit different. In Salt Lake, there's one sign company. Guy says, I'll cost me $5,000 a person. Just go give them enough $5,000 around, and I can get anything I want. And these are exact words to me. And so we have that going on, and that's just kind of the reality. But this decision of permitting the cities to zone transcends the original bill. The original bill was this: if there's any money that went into the road, the street, the highway that goes through a city, that the federal government, by putting federal funds in there, has the right to say whether or not there'll be billboards. So they have a position. We put money to get that street or that road in there, like State Street. They finance State Street through Salt Lake City. What runs 18 miles, something like that. It's the longest street in the world. It's State Street in Salt Lake City. And it goes through more than one city nowadays. In the old days, it wasn't. You got South Salt Lake City, and it goes on and on Murray, and et cetera, and Midvale, and Sandy, and Draper, and so on. Now, we had a meeting in Washington, D.C., and I've referenced this before. And in that meeting, and I want you to understand this, that Volpe had decided that he ought to at least talk to the people of Minnesota mining and manufacturing. They own more billboards than anybody else in the United States. Big. And they have the money behind them. Two full-time lobbyists are paid a lot of money. I had to deal and run up against them several times. I haven't gone through everything, but we had this meeting. And in that meeting were these two against one. And then there was me. But I decided and asked Kay Danes, who I've referenced before, who was an attorney. He worked for J.C. Penney Company at the time. And he didn't like to go outside the pale of J.C. Penney Company, but I had befriended him, and he liked me, and I liked him, and he helped me immensely, and I'd have failed without him. I can give a lot of credit to a lot of people where I'd have failed without them. But he is one. Jack Francis transcends them all. I mean, where'd I be without him? But, and there was Joe Bosco. So there's 5 of us. 2 and 2, and Joe Bosco, the referee. We're in the meeting, in a room, just outside of on the same floor, with where the Secretary of Transportation has his office. And that is really a big office. I was stunned when I walked in there the first time. I just couldn't get over how big it was. Now, so the question was, how can we bring Snarr together with Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing? Little Doug Snarr, with my little few signs, compared to them and this huge company behind them, and all their influence, which is monumental, and on we go. And it's headquartered, I think, in St. Paul, Minnesota. What happened was, we get in this meeting, and the question is asked, are you prepared to take any billboards down at all you own? Is there some way we can compromise on this? And it came down to no. No. That's simple. And old Bosco said, that's all I need to know. I'm with Snarr. That's it. He didn't say that, but that's what he told me afterwards. That was an easy one. That meeting went on and on and on, back and forth. They accused me of everything under the sun, and I'm just a little guy up against these guys. This is their business. But they were inflexible and exceedingly greedy, and they weren't going to give an inch. They were all nice and smiley and everything else, but when it came to me, I was like a devil to them, frankly. So I know that feeling, and being accused. wrongly, but I would go broke if I failed. And I was determined I was not going to fail. As I told Sullivan, the House Public Works Committee's legal counsel, asking me to go back to Salt Lake City, because if I stay in Washington, D.C., I will become a broken man. It will destroy my spirit because I was going to lose. The billboard issue is over with. And I said to him, I will only leave Washington, D.C. on two conditions. Either you guys do what you passed in this Congress to do, which has affected my business dramatically and destroyed me, or I'll go back in a pine box. One of the two. And in the end, it prevailed. And I think that's about the long and the short of it. And I think about it. To this day, I can't believe it even happened. I can hardly believe that I prevailed. When I think what I had going for me, which had started off being just me. Just me. Then I added, and I go back to these lines of Emerson. 47 lines in his great poem, Each and All. All are needed by each one. Had all these people help me. Nothing is fair or good alone. I can't do it on my own. I yielded myself to the perfect whole. And I did. And there are many perfect wholes. The big one, little ones within little ones, right on down. But that perfect whole to me is the truth within me. And I got to be honest to that and make good my signature that I gave to the bank when I borrowed up to, in today's money, about $12 million, maybe 15. And I paid it all off. I think we'll quit right now.